Of the 7 elements in Genshin Impact, my favorite one is pyro. It's not just because my favorite character is a pyro character, it's also because it's just a fun element to use. There's a bunch of useful reactions like melt, vaporize, overloaded, and burgeon. The pyro roster is also one of the most consistently good ones, not just in terms of damage in my opinion. Characters like Hu Tao, Arlecchino, Diluc, Lyney, Yoimiya, and Zhengling are all good to great damage dealers, and I have a soft spot for Thoma and Xinyan. But I feel like one of the least talked about pyro characters in terms of playstyle is Klee. She was one of the original event 5 stars, but nobody talks about her anymore. It's not like she's bad, she just has a lot of competition with what she can offer. Her Catalyst Charge Tech gameplay is done better with Wanderer, her Pyro application is outclassed by Zhengling, and her overall damage just isn't up to snuff with the modern standards. But if you know me, you know I love underrepresented characters, so I'm gonna beat Genshin Impact with only Klee. Here are the rules. I can only use Klee in battle. Any puzzles that require another element can be completed with another character. No fighting in co-op, and all Catalyst weapons are allowed. Now let's see if you can beat Genshin Impact using only Klee. Like in Zhongli only, we can't start the challenge until we actually get Klee. Also like Zhongli only, I really doubt just making reroll accounts will work to get Klee. I tried for a bit and... Oh, please, please. Oh no! Come on! Alright, yeah, I'm just gonna spend money. Oh, thank God. Thank God that didn't take long. First thing we need to do is Amber, Kaya, and Lisa's domains. First was Amber's domain, which we cleared normally because I could actually trigger the Pyro Monument. Next was Kaya's domain, which is actually where we get our first challenge. This room has a Pyro Slime, which Klee cannot touch. It would be fine if we had the Eye of Perception, but we don't have it. The first thing I tried to do to get around this was trying to trigger a Door of Resurrection after the room with the Pyro Slime. I tried a lot, but that didn't work. My next plan was to lead the Pyro Slime out of the room it was in and launch it off the platform. That actually worked, and spoilers, that's how I dealt with a lot of Pyro enemies and domains, especially Pyro Slimes. Lastly is Lisa's domain, which we skipped by jumping off an invisible platform. That's Act 1 done, and normally now would be the time for us to get to AR10 to start Act 2. But here's the thing. There's a Pyro Abyss Mage in Act 3 of Mondstadt that is mandatory, and there's no way to cheese the fight. I could try to get Eye of Perception to get around it, but I don't think I'll have enough time to beat it. You can fire off Eye of Perception shots at R1 every 12 seconds, and the fight has a 2-minute time limit. That means you would only be able to fire off 10 in total if you're lucky and have good timing. Even then, I don't think that's enough to take down the shield. I would either have to get multiple Eye Perceptions to get a higher refinement rank, or think of another strategy, which I did. Alright everyone, strap in, cause this is a long plan. So you know Hydrograna and Fontaine? Well, what if we grabbed Hydrograna from Fontaine and then teleported to Mondstadt, then rushed over to the fight to get rid of the Pyro Abyss Mage's shield faster? Well, that wouldn't work because there's not a teleport waypoint close enough to the area where you fight the Pyro Abyss Mage. Unless you use the portable waypoint. Yeah, I know it would take getting to AR 25 to unlock Reputation to actually get it, and then you would need to get to Reputation level 6, but it'll work! Hey, this is Killer Cook Me from the future. I'm just here to say, I was an idiot, and I forgot that there was a teleport waypoint literally right next to where you fight the Pyro Abyss Mage. I didn't actually need to get to AR 25, or even do anything for Reputation. I just needed to teleport over there and rush over to the Pyro Abyss Mage. But I didn't realize that, so I grinded to AR 25. Just know that it did work out in the end, but I feel really stupid. There are just a few things I need to test, so I switched to my main account for some testing. First thing I did was grab some Hydrograna and then teleport to Mondstadt to see if Hydrograna could actually leave Fontaine. And yes, they can. Second thing I did was try to use the Hydrograna against the Pyro Abyss Mage. To my absolute surprise, it worked. Now that I know this plan will work, I just need to grind to make it happen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We're still only AR7 after all. First I wanted to get to AR10, which involved a lot of Mondstadt exploration, like getting chests, collecting animoculi, and completing Adventure Handbook quests. Side note, they made a change to the Adventure Handbook. They made it so instead of having to complete the previous chapter to unlock the next chapter, you instead have to just reach a certain AR to unlock it. and I love and hate this change. I love it because it makes later chapters a lot easier to unlock, and I hate it because it makes early AR grinding a bit harder to do. But once you get past the early game, the adventure handbook becomes way less useful, so it doesn't really matter. Before long we reach AR 10 and are given a free 10 pull. All I got on standard banner was Yanfei, and from Prima gems I saved up to use on weapon banner I only got a Favonius Greatsword, so nothing useful. Later we reach AR 12, which unlocks commissions. Commissions are a fast and reliable way of getting experience, so it's really nice to have them. I wanted to stay in Mondstadt to grind for as long as I could. I already knew that Liyue and Dragonspine are basically treasure troves of experience, so I wanted to save those for when it would get harder to raise our adventure rank. As a result of staying in Mondstadt and not doing the Archon quest, I really don't have much to talk about from AR 12 to AR 15, but I will go over Klee's pros and cons. Pros: she has the strength of a 5-star. I might have said that Klee has been outmatched, but that doesn't mean that she's weak. Far from it, actually. Her normal attacks and especially charge attacks are strong, and her elemental skill is pretty good. Speaking of her elemental skill, it having 2 charges makes it so much better than it would have been if it didn't. They're also pretty good at generating particles for our burst, but we'll get into our burst soon. She's also one of the few catalyst characters that can mine, which will be useful when I explore Dragonspine later. Her first passive talent is also great. It makes it so that sometimes when you use your charge attack, it won't consume stamina, which is great because the stamina consumption for her charge attack is ridiculous. The passive talent she comes with is also very nice. It makes it so you can see Mondstadt regional specialty locations on your minimap, which is really useful for collecting her materials because they're pretty infamous for being hard to find. Now for the cons. She is small. Because of this, she's slow, which isn't a massive problem, but in combat, that can consume a lot of stamina while running away from attacks or dash dodging. Also, her burst is the most glaring flaw about her kit. All it really does is offer passive pyro damage, which is not bad, but it's not amazing either. It's worse in teams because your pyro application is so slow, but for this playthrough challenge, it's just kinda there. You're gonna notice a lot of the time in combat, Klee's burst will be ready to use for most fights because it just seemed like a waste to use it. Her biggest problem is that she can only attack with pyro. The only way she can hit some pyro enemies is with the Eye of Perception or Frostbearer, and we're gonna need one of those. Enemies like the Pyro Abyss Mage are gonna be a nuisance to deal with in this challenge. When I reached AR 15, I decided it was finally time to explore Liyue. While I was in Liyue, I did a lot of random exploration and some world quests, namely Treasure Lost, Treasure Found, and The Tree Who Stands Alone. I returned to Mondstadt to do Amber's and Zhangling story quests and do more commissions. It was around here when I realized how much reputation experience I would need for my Hydrogranite plan to work. I would need 2,200 experience to unlock the portable waypoint. It's already been almost 2 months since I last uploaded a challenge, so I need to think of something else. That something else is, well, it's way less interesting, let's be honest. I would first need to get the Eye of Perception, which as of recording this was on the weapon banner. And then I would need to reach AR 25 and over level. Yeah, that's really it. AR update, AR update. We're at AR 20. I decided at this point it was finally time to fight the Pyro Regisvine, which I feel is going to be one of the toughest parts of this playthrough, maybe besides Zenora. Alright, let's just get this over with. Oh my god, he was a pushover. I expected its 170% pyro resistance to do something, but it didn't. Klee just mowed through its HP like it was nothing. I guess that's one less thing to worry about during this playthrough. Afterwards, I renamed my team to Cleats and then did a few more quests. I did Lisa's story quest and did both the second part of Treasure Lost, Treasure Found and the Chi of Yore, which were all easy. A few domain runs into Celia Garden later were at AR 23, which by the way is the AR you can start Liyue at, and I still haven't even completed Act 2 of Mondstadt. I've been spending all my Prima Gems on Weapon Banner to try and get Eye of Perception, and I still haven't got it, but I have been getting a lot of portable power saws. In the meantime, I'll use Wine and Song because it's a decent weapon. I decided that there's not much else I can do, so it's finally time to start exploring Dragonspine. There's a lot I did in Dragonspine, but all of it had the same purpose. Get as much experience as possible and get Prima Gems for Eye of Perception. But before I could even do that much exploration in Dragonspine, this happened. I'm not even fucking surprised. Skyward Spine before one eye of perception is just a perfect indicator of my luck with this fucking weapon. I collected a bunch of crimson negates, opened the 3 boxes door, and collected plenty of chests before wishing on weapon banner. Eye of perception, eye of perception, eye of perception. Another portable power saw! I don't need it! Double 4-star. Eye of perception. Yes! Yes! I don't have to get Frostbearer. Thank God! Yes! If I didn't get that double 4-star, who knows how long I could have been grinding for. With our new Eye of Perception, I went to Liyue to go to the Virgin Jade Chamber, and then returned to Dragonspine to raise the Skyfrost Nail. Now, 1,915 words into the script, it's finally time to start Act 2 of Mondstadt. I'm going to speedrun covering Act 2 and Act 3 of Mondstadt up until the Pyro Abyss Mage in Act 3. We meet Venti, who takes us to Windrise, where we fight an Eye of the Storm, which was really easy to take down. We then reach Air 25, and then meet the weird grown-up, and then go to the Fatui hideout, where we bullied the agent. Something I didn't get on camera was me getting another Eye of Perception, but it was very appreciated. Now we need to collect the 3 teardrop crystals, and to get the first one we destroyed the ruined guard because we almost exclusively attack with pyro aside from the Eye of Perception orb. In the domain, we run into our first Pyro Abyss Mage. I could have just gotten rid of its shield by using the water in the room, but I decided to test if my Eye of Perception orbs could beat the Pyro Abyss Mage in 2 minutes, which, if you recall, is the time limit that you're given against the Pyro Abyss Mage in Act 3. And yes, it can. This gives me a lot of hope. We failed to summon Dvalin in now Act 3. First is the Hydro Abyss Mage, whose shield we could burn away fast. Inside of Stormterror's lair, we get a useless weapon, but I think that might be a 4 stars in a row. What is happening? It was indeed 5 4 stars. Which I wonder, is that rarer than a 5-star? We have to activate 3 light actuators, and that's where we run into the main villain of this playthrough. This Pyro Abyss Mage. This one enemy was the reason I grinded all the way to AR 25. And did it work? It worked first try and it was really easy. Get the fuck down and get the fuck out. I had to grind all the way to AR 25 for all that. All that just for that. All that just... I might add Pyro Abyss Mage to the list of enemies I hate. Now I decided to do the Ascension Domain because I already know Dvalin is going to be easy either way. The Ascension Domain was really easy. The last room didn't even take 30 seconds to beat. Now time for Dvalin. I honestly feel bad for Dvalin because he got his HP taken down in less than 4 seconds from the point I started attacking it. Oh my fucking god, Klee! Calm down! And that's the end of Act 3, and you probably expect me to start Liyue's Archon quest right after completing Act 3, but I actually need to do Diluc and Razor's story quest to be able to do We Will Be Reunited, which is one of the Dainsleif quests. We need to do that quest because we can't start Inazuma before completing it, so it's better to get those 2 story quests out of the way early. With those done, now we can start Liyue. Rex Lapis dies, and then the other child of Tevat orders us to tell the Adepti about his death. First was Mooncarver. He gives us a buff that increases our energy recharge, but we could only use our burst once, so it wasn't that useful. Next was Mountain Shaper, and because Klee can break rocks, it was really easy to find this guy's brother in the Amber. Next is Clouded Hinner, who we made some food for before jumping off a tree to skip her entire domain. Lastly is Zhao, and all we really have to do here is fight this Ruin Hunter. It only got off 2 attacks before it died, and that's the end of Act 1. Before starting Act 2, I decided to test something that people in the comments of Layla only would not stop telling me about. Apparently, if you use a Harpastum against the Eon Blight Drake while it's flying, you can paralyze it. I got a lot of comments about this, so it's finally time to settle this. Does this work as of 4.6? I did not expect that to work. Okay, but how the hell was I supposed to know about that guy? I'm not mad. I'm just very confused where you all learned this. At the start of Act 2, we meet the man with the giant, huge, gargantuan pillar, and then go to boil some rocks in Mondstadt. For the first time in one of these solo challenges things Diluc only, I was actually able to heat up the pot without switching to another character or using Swirl. Next is Granny's Teapot. There were a bunch of slimes, but thankfully none of them were pyro, so it was easy. Later we meet the character who would probably be a good friend of Klee's if they would just meet already, and then go to the Guizhong Ballista to fight some treasure hoarders. You probably noticed how I said every fight has been easy. That's no hyperbole. Every single fight has been easy. Klee is surprisingly strong for just being level 50 and having an eye perception at level 50. Klee is definitely an underrated character. Later we discussed with Zhongli where would be good places to go fish blasting in Liyue, which is where Act 2 ends. Now it's time for Act 3, which starts with fighting some Milla soldiers at the Guizhong Ballista. These guys were even easier than the treasure hoarders we just fought on here. By the way, Sucrose is here because I used her for a puzzle and forgot to switch her out. Next were 3 Cryo Whopper Flowers, who were obliterated very fast. Next is the fight with the other child of Teyvat. In Phase 1 and 2, we were the bully and Child was the nerd. In Phase 3, it wasn't quite like that, but we still destroyed him. Next was Osile, who I actually died to, believe it or not. It was only because I couldn't get out of the way of one of his blasts and I was running out of stamina, and on the second try we blew him up pretty easily, so it wasn't because this fight was difficult, it was just stamina. That's the end of Liyue Act 3. Before we can start Inazuma, we have to do both Dainsleif quests. First was the Dainsleif World quest. For this quest I had to fight 2 Pyro Abyss Mages. I would complain more, but I know it's going to get worse in a later Dainsleif quest. Thankfully in Will Be Reunited we only have to beat 1 Pyro Abyss Mage, but it being paired with a Ruin Guard was kinda annoying. But that wasn't the toughest part of this quest. It was actually the last fight with the Abyss Herald and 2 Abyss Mages. Since I didn't bother taking down the Pyro Abyss Mage, I had to dodge him in tandem with the Hydro Abyss Mage. I died once, but I was able to take them down the second try. With those done, we can do the Inazuma Prologue quest, which only has slimes and treasure hoarders. All the treasure hoarders were easy and most of the slimes were easy, but there were some pyro slimes. The small ones were easy to take down with the eye of perception, and we were able to drown the big slime. At this point in the challenge, Klee has been dominating this game, besides Pyro Abyss Mage. I feel like she deserves a reward for her amazing performance. If you've watched Diluc or Ningguang only, you know what's about to happen.
Klee, bye, boom, bum! I'm a mage just like my mom!
Now we can start Inazuma Act 1. The first part of this Archon quest is a lot of running around in Rito, which isn't interesting, so let's skip to the first part of combat in this quest, the transport mission. It was, of course, easy, because there's only treasure hoarders in Ronin. A while later, we team up with the other arsonists of Teyvat to break somebody out of jail. I forgot to mention, but Klee can launch literally anything with her charge attack. She doesn't just launch the normal Tenryou Commission soldiers with ease, she also launches the big boy Tenryou Commission soldiers with ease. That's the end of Act 1, and now we need to complete Ayaka's and Yoimiya's story quests to start Act 2. These quests aren't that interesting, so we're just gonna skip to Act 2. Act 2 starts with us fighting the Raiden Shogun, but I discovered something by accident. I was AFK when the battle started, so she got a lot of hits on me. You would assume I would just die by this, but actually no. The fight will actually end once you reach a certain amount of HP. That makes this fight a lot faster. Almost all the rest of my Act 2 footage and almost all of my Act 3 footage got corrupted, so we're gonna recreate it. We save the Virgin, then go to the Resistance camp to do some archery demonstration, which Klee couldn't do, so we let Amber do it instead. We beat some Tenryou Commission soldiers at the front lines, and that's the end of Act 2, so now Act 3. There's 2 main things I need to cover here. The Delusion Factory and the Signora fight. The Delusion Factory was really easy. All the enemies were taken down fast and barely any of them got their shields. Signora was interesting. On my first attempt at Signora, I died about halfway through the pyro phase because she kept on doing moves that I'd never seen her do that early in the fight, and kept stringing along moves that were hard to dodge. On the second try, her AI was dumb, so we beat her easily. Lastly is the Raiden Shogun, which I did get on camera thankfully. The same trick with the first Raiden Shogun fight also applies to this fight. You don't have to do anything in the first phase. During the second phase, you do have to do stuff, but it's really easy. That's the end of Inazuma Act 3. Now we need to complete the Dainsleif Chasm quest and get to AR-35 to start Sumeru. The Dainsleif Chasm quest has Black Serpent Knights and Abyss enemies, which of course includes...
Oh no! Not you again! I've dealt with this 3 times this week already!
I had to fight 3 of these things back to back to back. Every other Abyss enemy was easy, but those 3 Pyro Abyss Mages were the worst. Thankfully, that is the last mandatory Pyro Abyss Mage that I have to fight. Now I just need to get to AR-35, which we did by fighting the Pyro Regicide a bunch and doing a few domain runs. The AR-35 Essential Domain was really easy, just like the AR-25 one. Before starting Sumeru, I grinded for my talents. I got my normal attack to 5, Jumpty Dumpty to 5, and Sparks and Splash to 3. Now it's time to start Sumeru. First we have to clear the withering zone with Tighnari. All that were in there were hydrofungi who we could easily use vaporize on because they were in the water. Later in the dream domain we fought some easy hilichurls, and then we go to Sumeru City to get our Akasha terminal. Later we go to Port Ormos and meet Alhaitham. Later we buy some knowledge capsules from Dory and test one of them on some easy fungi. Later we fight some Eremites at the dock, who are really quickly taken down. Act 2 is mostly lore with one bit of combat, which was easy, so we're gonna skip to Act 3. We meet
the Doctor,
and then fight some Eremites in the forest, all of which were easily taken down. In the desert, we fight some Rift Hounds who are always a little tanky, but never really that hard. Next is Act 4, which starts with more Eremites. They're just as easy as all the other Eremites we fought. At the Elazar Hospital, there are a bunch of hilichurls and a Lawachurl. Here's a fun fact, Klee can launch Lawachurls. Truly, nothing can stop Klee at this point. For the Dendro monuments, I tried doing the trick where you grab a Dendrogranum and then rush over to the pillars, but that only worked for one of them, so we used Kali to trigger the other ones. Later is the King Deshret domain. All enemies in here were fungi and we were able to skip a lot of them. The final room always gives me a bit of trouble, and while they did take down a lot of Klee's HP, we were never in any real danger. Now it's time for Act 5. First there are more Eremites and we have helpers for this, but we didn't really need them because they're still as easy as ever. Later at Party's DI we have to fight a bunch of Fatui soldiers and absolutely none of them were difficult. I made sure to attack the Pyro and Electro Fatui soldiers as fast as I could to avoid them getting their shields, which worked. Way later in the Archon quest, we enter the Dias Foundry, which is filled with more Fatui soldiers. I had a similar tactic in this domain as I did with the Fatui soldiers at Party's DI. That resulted in this domain being a complete pushover. Next is Scaramouche. Phase 1 was, of course, easy, and in Phase 2, Klee could take down the Nirvana engines because her charge attack AoE is way wider than it probably should be. She was also able to take him down in one phase, which is the first time a solo challenge could do that. Last is the polluted part of Irminsul. I could launch some of the Rift Hounds off the platform and deal with the big Rift Hound with less trouble, and on the boat were a bunch of hilichurls and an Electro Lawachurl. We were destroying this fight until all of a sudden,
I wanna go home now.
Weirdly enough, his HP didn't reset, so I just quickly defeated the Electro Lawachurl and the last hilichurl. That's the end of Sumeru Act 5. Now I need to get to AR40 and complete Kari Barrett to start Fontaine. First I did Kari Barrett because it would give me a good amount of experience. Thankfully the only Abyss enemy was the Cryo Abyss Herald, which you could probably assume was really easy. Now I just need to get to AR40 and we have some leftover commission keys, so let's use them to do our story quest, Jean's story quest, and Venti's story quest. That gets us a lot of experience, but not quite enough, so I used a bunch of condensed resin to grind for both experience and Klee's talent books. By the end I was at AR40 and my talents looked like this. Now we can start Fontaine. We meet Linny and Lynette at Romaritine Harbor. At the start of Act 1 you have to collect Romaritine flowers at Romaritine Harbor for Linny and Lynette. You don't actually need a Hydra character to collect them, you just need to rush over with a Hydrograna. This kinda reminds me of my old plan. We then go to the court of Fontaine to meet Fremine, and then the other child of Tevat shows up and takes this fight for us. That's the only instance of combat in this act, so let's skip to Act 2. Most of Act 2 is teaming up with Navia to fight crime, which leads us to go into the Synth hideout. In there are a bunch of Gardamex, and all of them are simply taken down. Something I noticed is that Klee is definitely a glass cannon. She deals good damage, but she doesn't absorb damage really well. This guy goes to jail, but so does the other child of Tevat, which is the main plot of Act 3 and Act 4. There's no combat in these quests, but we all know what Klee got in jail for. Lastly is Act 5. First is the Tower Domain, and might I say, fuck this room of enemies. All other rooms are fine, but every time I enter this room, I know I'll die at least once, which is exactly what happened here. It's a real small place with 3 tanky enemies who all have projectiles. Whoever made this room must hate the people who do Genshin challenges. Later we put Farina on trial for not being the Archon, which long story short leads to the death of Focalor and the fight with the Narwhal. This fight's never hard, especially during the Archon quest because you don't even need to really beat it. The all-devouring Narwhal is defeated, and that's the end of Fontaine Act 5, which means we beat Genshin Impact using only Klee. Honestly, going into this, I thought it was going to be a lot harder than it actually was. Turns out she destroyed nearly everything in her path. One of the reasons I love doing these challenges is to grow deeper appreciations for characters I've always liked but never truly used, and Klee was one of those characters that I grew a deeper appreciation for after this challenge. On the tier list of difficulty, I'll put it just below D-Luke only, and on the solo tier list just below D-Luke as well. Only because of her troubles with Pyro Abyss mages and her frailness. My next challenge will be the long-awaited Kirara only, but until then, I'll leave you with that.